This review is brought to you by Audible. All right, this is my personal second review of Xbox One games. It is our third in totality. Quite different from what I did with Forza. It's Ryse, Son of Rome. It's kind of a more standard action game. Doesn't involve any driving. And also, in distinction to Forza, it's not very good. Ryse, Son of Rome is an old-school hack and slash in some very bedazzled togas. Visually, it's an understandable choice for the launch of the Xbox One, but gameplay-wise, it's a little strange and seems to hail from an era that predates the console generation we are leaving behind. In fact, what's even stranger, in its limited scope and repetitive gameplay, it invokes the similarly quizzical PS4 launch title Knack, except drenched in a lot more blood and extremities.
Defeat your Emperor!
Taking place in Rome under the reign of Emperor Nero, the game focuses on Marius Titus, a young soldier who comes from a family of an influential senator. Beginning at the story's conclusion, Rome is under siege from barbarians, and Marius is handily dispatching members of the uncivilized mob as he races to the imperial palace to protect the emperor and, upon doing so, relates the tale of his parents being slain by the barbarians, his travels to Britannia to seek revenge and pacify the rest of tribes, and the complications that ensue and brought the hordes of Europe past the gates of Rome. And if you can't figure out everything in the first 15 minutes, then call me. I need to study you.
If it's blood you want, I promise I will give you as much as you can handle.
Even beyond being stunningly obvious, the storytelling is cringeworthy and outdoes the litany of sword and sandals dialogue that polluted movie screens in the wake of Ben-Hur. Much of the game is a parade of uninspired melodrama. Landing in Britannia plays out like Saving Private Romulus, and one of Nero's sons is torn from John Hurt's famously fade portrayal of Caligula on the BBC. Novel themes like war begets war and losing your soul while protecting civilization play out like new ideas. It's not that liberal borrowing from classic themes is so bad, but here it's so sincere, so enraptured with its own epiphany that you'd think it was written by a 12-year-old.
I've heard rumors there is great unrest in Rome.
Yes, these are dangerous times we live in.
Unfortunately, this less than fun tale surrounds gameplay that similarly struggles to find a spark of life. With a very limited moveset, attack, block, and shield bash, Ryse attempts to develop a tense high-stakes combat scenario, but cannot find the energy to carry it through the entirety of the game.
Ambush! Clear the bridge!
While movements seem quick and the goal is to elegantly chain one action into the next, there's a leaden quality to fighting, in large part because it's so reactive. Look for the unblockable to move out of the way. Shield bash the enemies with shields or quick movements. Block the attack behind you, all of which then opens up 2 or 3 quick jabs. It's nothing more than Rochambeau exploding with plasma. It kept my attention for a couple of hours until it became clear that all the enemies, all with attack sets as broad as my vocal range, were already revealed. Yes, they look different, like having scary pagan masks, but the enemies only increase in number, not behavior nor interest. Very quickly, the game descends into sheer drudgery as you go from one small space fighting the same hairy, angry dudes to the next. I couldn't describe one particular sequence from another to anyone who asks. Even the boss battles are a tedious exercise in repetitious behavior. Figure out their 1 or 2 movesets, wait, hit them until finished. These combat issues and the inability to keep it fresh may explain the inclusion of Focus, an activated power that slows down time, leaving Marius virtually invulnerable and able to deal a remarkable amount of damage. With minimal understanding of the upgrades and perks, this skill can thankfully be used frequently to expedite the combat and dispense with enemies quickly enough to keep the game from completely collapsing under its sodden weight. It's just a strange inclusion because it so undermines the intent of the combat design and seems to signal the game's own discomfort with its core mechanic. And then there's the finishing move. These are the antecedents of the QuickTime events that characterized the game after its disastrous showing at E3. No longer with button prompts, but color-coded highlights around the enemies that prompt button pushing, they are, plain and simple, QuickTime events. Their logic is embedded in what the animations are on screen. Shield attack for Y and sword for X. But it nonetheless is nothing more than Simon Says, and its ubiquitous presence in every facet of the combat adds an entirely new level of tedium to what is already a very tiresome affair. You can upgrade more finishing moves to satiate bloodlust, but after the initial recognition of how pretty it is to chop off both arms, it reveals itself to be a craven gameplay hook appealing to the crassest interests of the perceived audience.
Welcome home.
About those upgrades. You can earn them through gameplay, or you can just outright buy them. It is immediately apparent that you can purchase your progress throughout all of Ryse. It was present in Forza, where it seemed acceptable, but here it stands out awkwardly, especially because it is so unnecessary. This game is eminently playable. It just isn't fun. This is the second game at launch from Microsoft that engages in this pay-your-way option, and it sets an unsettling precedent about what to expect in the future for game monetization and how it may impact design. The combat is broken up a bit with sequences where you man classical turrets and auto-aim rampaging barbarians, as well as moving in formation with your legion. But as with everything else in the game, there's nothing to distinguish one moment from the next. It's cut and paste over and over. No! There's also multiplayer, which utilizes the same combat system, but to a slightly more satisfying effect. Taking place in the Colosseum, you engage in a form of horde mode where you and a friend combat waves of enemies, occasionally performing slightly more precise objectives like protecting wicker men from fire. Perhaps due to the larger spaces to fight in, the combat feels quicker and more satisfying, and double teaming on one enemy has an odd cooperative satisfaction. But in the end, it still suffers from the sameness and predictability of the enemies. Despite all the allure of upgrades and perks, the core element of the game, the combat and its ham-fisted implementation, just drags it back down. Ryse is a pretty game that I looked forward to playing for the hack-and-slash combat, and then became quickly alienated by its very allure. The visual palette and setting give the promise of something rough and visceral, but in the end, it's tired and boilerplate. A 2 out of 5.
You should open it.
All right, there you go. Don't just watch this review. There are other ones. There's Dead Rising 3, there's Forza 5, and there's a really deep and interesting look at the Xbox One itself. So make sure that you check all that out. And with that, let's take a moment to thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible has over 150,000 audiobooks to choose from in almost every genre. You can download and listen on an iOS device, Android, Kindle Fire, Windows Phone, and basically anything that has a headphone jack. Today, I'm recommending I, Claudius because, you know, it's about Rome, and that's the reference to John Hurt. You can download that or any audiobook of your choosing for free and get a free 30-day trial membership just by going to audiblepodcast.com/rev3games.